Ladies and gentlemen, my dear English-speaking friends, welcome to the village of Tufo, location of the famous wine Greco di Tufo. I'm Ferrante di Somma, and I am the owner of the winery Cantine di Marzo, the winery which gave birth to the Greco di Tufo. The village of Tufo is a rather ancient village. It dates back to the 9th century, to be more specific, the year 888. At that time, the region was dominated by some Germanic people called the Longobards, whose capital was Benevento, which is a city about 20 miles from here. And there are written documents which say that in the year 888, a prince of Benevento, a Longobard prince called Aione, built his first watchtower in the region. The region was important for military reasons. We are in the valley of the Sabbato between two cities, Avellino and Benevento, and this watchtower was important to observe movements of troops in the area. And this Prince Aione therefore built his watchtower. This Tower of Aione, in Latin Turris Aionis, gave the name to the village of Torrioni, which we see up there on the hilltop. Actually, most of the villages you will see in the region are built on hilltops because for military reasons it was a good way to protect from invaders. Let us not forget that Italy has been invaded by practically everybody throughout the Middle Ages. And here we are in the sub-region of Irpinia, the county which is part of Campania, east of Naples. We might be 45 minutes from the Amalfi Coast, but we are in a mountainous region with quite a fresh climate, which is perfect for making wine. So, Tufo was developed mostly in Norman times. Actually, there are even written traces of a battle which took place in Tufo between two Norman factions. And one faction not being able to take hold of the village as a revenge, destroyed the vineyards all around it. And these written documents talk about this act as an act of absolute barbarity, because killing people was one thing, destroying vineyard was absolutely unacceptable. The land where the Greco di Tufo is made is quite special because the soil is very, very rich in brimstone, or sulfur in other words. You might associate the idea of brimstone with the devil. Actually, brimstone is a mineral that was very important in the 19th century and the 20th century and is still important nowadays for agricultural reasons. Where does this sulfur or this brimstone come from? You must imagine that here in prehistoric times there was a tropical sea. And the sea organism dying on the sea bottom, fossilizing became, the organic parts of the sea organisms became sulfur, and the shells gave small deposits of chalk. All this was covered by pyroclastic flows with various volcanic eruptions, and this gave what the French would call a very special terroir for a Greco di Tufo. And here I would like to point out the difference between a Greco di Tufo from the village of Tufo and a Greco di Tufo from the other 7 villages which are allowed to use this name, Greco di Tufo. Here we have the brimstone, and this will give much more mineral qualities to the wine, a slight saltiness too. The Di Marzo family, of which I am a descendant, were very important in the development of this region. First of all, because of Scipione di Marzo, the first known ancestor of the family. The story says that Scipione di Marzo in 1647 left his hometown of San Paolo Belsito near the Vesuvio to flee the plague. According to some, in 1647, basically according to my father. I personally know it's 1648. The story also says that he brought with him this white variety of grape which he planted in the area. The grape at the time was called Greco del Vesuvio, and he planted it here in Tufo, where it found this special soil which gave a wine with extraordinary qualities, which we find still today. And therefore Scipione di Marzo is known as the creator, the inventor of the Greco di Tufo. Another main feature of the Di Marzo family was the mining of the sulfur in the area. Another story says that Francesco Di Marzo, another ancestor of mine, in 1866, while he was riding on his land, saw some shepherds burning rocks. And curious, he approached and he saw that they were burning pieces of brimstone. That's how he understood that his land was very rich with that mineral, and he started a mining activity which lasted until 1984 and which made the fortune of Tufo. The Di Marzo family also built the Palazzo Di Marzo, which you see behind me, which is a fortified villa embedded inside the protective walls of the town. The construction started already on pre-existing Norman basis and was developed first in the 17th century by Scipione and then by Pasquale Di Marzo in the 18th century. Unfortunately, the building was severely damaged in the earthquake of 1980, and our next objective will be to restore this piece of architecture. And here we are in front of the entrance of the winery. As you can see, not very industrial. The grapes actually used to come this way by donkey and were thrown in a destemmer and the crusher where the vinification process started. But please follow me, let me show you. You might wonder what a piece of brimstone looks like coming out of the soil. Well, here we are. This is the sort of soil on which our vines grow. So this is sulfur with a mix of clay. And the mining activity consisted in digging this mineral out, grinding it into a powder, boiling it and separating the clay from the sulfur. After which it was reassembled according to the necessary proportions. Clay is necessary in agriculture for the brimstone, so that the powder will stick to the plant. Sulfur still today is very important in viticulture to protect the plant from different fungus and disease. So here we are in one of the rooms where we keep our vats for making our red and white wines. One thing you won't see much of are wooden barrels in our winery for one very simple reason. In my view, Irpinia whites should not go in a barrel. The Greco di Tufo as well as the Fiano di Avellino both must have, in my view, a bit of a cutting edge. And that's why if you put a Greco in a wooden barrel, I always say it's like turning a wild horse into a fat cow, or it's like castrating a stallion. You're removing really the life of this wine. The acidity, this spikiness is what gives this wine its character. If you put it in wood, it's going to round it to a point where you will not find really the main features of the Greco di Tufo or the Fiano di Avellino. I have nothing against oak in general. Oak is very appropriate for certain types of wines, like a Chardonnay, but more for the sort of buttery wine. The Greco di Tufo is more on the citrus, is more on the saltiness, is more on cutting edge tastes. And if you smooth a blade, it's not a blade anymore. And the Greco has to be a bit of a cutting blade. Therefore, you will see mostly these stainless steel vats, which is the best way. They're all connected between themselves with a system of hot and cold water to control the temperature without having to move the wine. And here, the wine matures for a certain amount of months before it's filtered and then bottled. So please follow me. This is the room where we keep our sparkling wine. The Di Marzo estate has a relatively old tradition in the making of sparkling wine. with the traditional method. First question we want to answer is, what is the traditional method? The traditional method, also previously known as méthode champenoise, was a method invented by Dom Pérignon in France in the 17th century, which consists of having a second fermentation of wine in the bottle, which will create the bubbles of the sparkling wine. So how does it work? You start making white wine, then you put the white wine in the bottle with some yeast and some sugar. When I say yeast and sugar, I mean fermentation, therefore fermentation, production of carbon dioxide, the carbon dioxide which will give the bubble of the sparkling wine. So here the wine is kept for a certain amount of time, as you can see, with the yeast inside the bottle. We keep it for a period of 36 months, after which we had to remove this yeast from the bottle. The cap that you see here is just for the aging process. After 36 months, the bottle, previously the way it worked in the traditional method was the bottles were put in this riddling desk, and the person would do the riddling for a period of about a month. They would move the bottles so that the yeast would accumulate in the neck of the bottle, after which you would open the bottle, the yeast would fly out, you would put the cork, the cage, and the bottle would be ready. Nowadays it's much more of a mechanical system. We have a mechanized basket which moving creates the same conditions as when you do the riddling by hand. After which the neck of the bottle is frozen, and this cork of ice and yeast just flies away when you open the bottle. Then you put the cork, the cage, and the bottle is ready. But the question we want to answer is, why did we start making sparkling wine in 1926? The fact is that at the end of the 19th century, Europe was practically all of European viticulture was destroyed by a very bad parasite called phylloxera, which killed 90% of European vineyards. And the solution was only found after the war, after the Second World War, when they started putting European plants, European vines on American rootstock. The American rootstock resists the phylloxera, therefore we were able to resuscitate all European vineyards. We were fortunate enough that phylloxera arrived in southern Italy after the Second World War, so there was a long period during which southern Italy was providing bulk wine for France, for French consumption, which lasted from the end of the 19th century to about the period of the war. And that was a moment of great wealth for southern Italy, and we ourselves sold a lot of bulk wine to France, including white wine to Champagne, which gave us an idea, why not start making our own sparkling wine? And that's how we started in 1926 to make our own sparkling wine with the Greco variety. Here you see where we keep the bottles for a period of 36 months, after which they are disgorged and the bottle will be ready for consumption. Although I said you won't see much oak in my winery, that doesn't mean there is no oak. You see here a certain amount of barrels that we use for one of our Aglianicos, which is a red wine, and obviously, and most of all for our Taurasi, which by law has to stay for 1 year in oak. As you might deduce, we do not make much Taurasi. So now we are in what I call our tasting room, or should I say our tasting cave. The place where I'm sitting presently, we believe that in the past it might have been a chapel, because this whole room, if one sees from the different holes inside the walls, consisted of a wooden scaffolding, and from that window up there you could see the castle of Ceppaloni, which means there was a visual contact between castles. What does this mean? This means that this does not start off as a winery. We are actually in the underground passages of the walls, the protective walls of the village. And these caves started to be dug out we believe, in Norman times, which means we're talking of the 11th, 12th century. What we do know is that they stopped digging around the 18th century. So here we have a multitude of other passages and hidden rooms that have not been discovered yet, and which we hope to discover soon. And as a conclusion to our tour, I wanted to show you, introduce you to my children. There's 10 of them. We have, 3 reds, the rest Greco di Tufo, Fiano di Avellino, and we have some sparkling wines. I hope you've enjoyed this tour of the winery. It was very brief. I didn't want to bore you, and I hope to see you very soon because there's a lot more I need to tell you. A lot more secrets behind the history of the winery that I think you will find interesting. I hope in the meantime you will enjoy the wines, and I hope to meet you personally very soon. Goodbye.